The air in Jerome smelled faintly of bread and rain. I was walking toward the plaza watching paper flags flutter above the crowd when I saw a little girl crouched by the fountain. She held a small cookie in her hand, cracked in half dust, clinging to the frosting. When she dropped it, she didn't cry. She just stared at it for a long moment, then brushed it off and slipped it into her pocket. Something in the way she did it slow, careful, as if the cookie mattered more than her hunger, pulled me closer. I bent down and reached into my bag for another. "Here, sweetheart," I said softly, offering her a fresh one wrapped in paper. She flinched, then looked up. Her eyes were too large for her face, dark and familiar. And under her right eye, just below the lashes, a small birthmark shaped like a teardrop. My breath caught. She studied me, uncertain, her fingers tightening around the edge of her sleeve. Then, barely audible, she whispered, "Grandma." The word broke through the noise of the plaza like a bell. For a second, everything went quiet. The chatter, the music, the street vendors calling out their prices. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. No, it couldn't be. My granddaughter was supposed to be in England, living in some bright little flat, with her parents going to a school with uniforms and neat shoes. Adrian had made sure of that. She told me they'd moved for good, that I needed to stop clinging. But this child, the dirt on her cheeks, the torn shoes, the unmistakable mark, there was no mistaking her. Isla. My knees trembled as I sank down to meet her eyes. "Sweetheart," I whispered. But before I could say anything more, she took my hand. "Come," she said. "Daddy's waiting." And before I could breathe, she was already leading me away from the plaza toward the sound of water running beneath the bridge. The path narrowed as we left the plaza, cutting between buildings stained with sun and time. Isla held my hand with more certainty than fear, though she kept glancing back to make sure I was still there. We crossed a quiet street and turned down a slope where the city's noise gave way to a different kind of silence, the hush of traffic above and the trickle of water below. The bridge was low squat, its underbelly marked by graffiti and smoke. Isla stepped over a sagging tarp and a pile of cardboard flattened into the dirt. "Daddy?" she called, then again, louder. "Daddy." I found her. A figure stirred in the shadows. He stood slowly, his joints stiff, like he'd been crouched there too long. The beard was patchy, his clothes hung loose, but I would have known him anywhere. "Caleb?" I said. My voice cracked. He didn't move toward me, just stared, arms limp at his sides, eyes sunken. "You weren't supposed to see this." I opened my mouth, but nothing came. "Don't look at me like that," he said, sharper now, as if my silence hurt more than words could. "We were supposed to be in London by now." But she left. Took the money. Took everything. He sat down on a crate that had once held oranges. Isla knelt beside him, resting her head against his arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. I stood there, afraid if I moved, I might wake up from this, or worse, confirm it was real. When I asked, 4 months ago, he muttered. We kept waiting. Thought maybe she'd come back. She didn't. I looked at Isla, at her thin frame, the way her socks didn't match the crust on the corner of her mouth. Then I looked back at the man who used to make her pancakes shaped like stars. "We're going home," I said. Now. Caleb didn't argue. He only nodded slow, like someone halfway through drowning, who finally stopped fighting the current. He gathered their things in silence. I waited, heart pounding already, picturing the old guest room. By nightfall, we were on a bus heading north, the city of bridges fading behind us. The house hadn't changed much since they left. Same creaky floorboard by the hallway, same dent in the doorframe where Caleb had crashed his tricycle. But the silence felt heavier now, like it had been waiting all this time for someone to fill it. I set Isla up with warm soup and a blanket, then stood in front of the old shop door, key in hand. The candy store had been shuttered since the winter after Richard died. I used to tell myself I'd reopen it next season. That season never came. Inside, it smelled of dust and memory. Empty glass jars lined the shelves like soldiers in retreat. I touched one and left a clean fingerprint behind. In the back, the copper kettle still hung from its hook. I ran my hand along the counter and whispered, "He would have wanted this." The next morning, Caleb came downstairs early. "You thinking of reopening?" he asked. His voice was low, uncertain. I didn't answer right away. He stood beside me, looking at the same front window I'd avoided for years. "I could fix the sign," he added. "It's rotted halfway through. And I want to make a picture for the candy Isla chimed from the stairs holding a notebook. One with hearts and a bunny." I smiled just a little. "Let's see if sweet things can survive bitter years," I said. We worked quietly for days. Caleb scrubbed the windows and patched the walls. Isla painted signs in colored pencil and taped them inside the display case. I restocked ingredients called suppliers, cleaned every jar. We didn't talk much about before, but in the way Caleb tightened the lid on each container, or the way Isla lit up when the first batch of peanut brittle snapped just right, I saw it something slowly unfreezing between us. A week later, we flipped the sign from closed to open. Just like that. Voss Family Sweets was back. That afternoon, as I swept the doorway, a shadow fell across the glass. A woman in a blazer stood outside, holding an envelope. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. The woman with the envelope turned out to be from the leasing office routine papers about the shop's reactivation. Nothing more. But her presence had stirred something uneasy in me, and when I looked at Caleb, I could see the same shadow cross his face. That night, after Isla was asleep, he came to the kitchen and stood by the doorway, hands shoved in his pockets. "I need to tell you what really happened," he said. I didn't move. The kettle clicked softly as it cooled. "She told me you were trying to control us," he began, "that you'd never let us live our own lives unless I broke away. She said you called her lazy, manipulative." I swallowed the words that rose to defend myself. His eyes were glassy with shame, and I didn't want to break him open any further. "She told me if I didn't act fast, you'd find a way to take over everything. The shop, my savings. She said it was for our protection, just some paperwork to simplify taxes before we moved." He laughed under his breath, but it wasn't laughter. "I signed everything, Mom. The accounts, the title to the car, even the transfer for the business loan. She said it was temporary." I gripped the counter, trying to keep my voice steady. And then he looked down. 2 days before the flight, she packed her things, said she needed to drop off documents at the embassy. She never came back. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and slow. "I called her for weeks," he said, his voice cracking. "Every number was disconnected. The bank said the transfers cleared. She took it all." I wanted to rage, to demand why he hadn't seen it coming, but instead I reached for a dish towel and folded it. "You were in love," I said quietly, "and she was in business." Caleb covered his face with his hands. "I ruined everything." "No," I said, walking past him toward the window. Outside, the sign of the shop still swung gently in the night breeze. "Not everything. Not yet." We opened the doors on a Thursday morning. No balloons, no banner. Just a new coat of paint on the window frame and a handwritten sign that read, "Voss Family Sweets. Open." The first customer was Mr. Harris from 2 streets over. He used to come in for lemon drops after his morning walks with his wife. She'd passed last year. He stepped inside slowly, looking around like he was visiting a memory. "Thought I'd never see this place open again," he said. I handed him a paper bag, and he nodded. "Still smells right." By noon, a few more wandered in. 2 high schoolers bought fudge squares and ate them on the curb, laughing through chocolate-stained teeth. A mother came in with a toddler who kept pointing at the peanut brittle jars and whispering snap candy. And just before closing, a little boy pressed his entire face against the front glass, fogging it up until Caleb opened the door and handed him a sample. Caleb handled deliveries in the afternoons, mostly small orders to local cafes. Isla became the official scooper, carefully weighing ingredients on the old brass scale. Every time I turned around, I caught her measuring too slowly just to stay in the room longer. The rhythm returned in small steps. Boiling, pouring, cutting, wrapping. At first, my hands moved cautiously, unsure they remembered how to temper sugar without burning it. But the muscle memory was still there, buried under dust and grief. That night, as I cleaned the counters, Caleb brought in the day's ledger. "Not bad," he said. "Not great, but not bad." I looked at the numbers. Modest, honest. More than I expected. He leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, face calm in a way I hadn't seen in years. From the kitchen, the scent of warm molasses drifted in, soft and heavy. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel quiet in that hollow way. It just felt full. I turned off the lights, locked the front door, and tucked the cash box beneath the counter. On the floor near the mail slot, a single envelope waited, thick and cream-colored. The envelope was stiff, the kind of paper that costs more than common sense. My name was typed cleanly in the center, no return address. Inside the letter was formal, distant, and sharp-edged. Adrienne was filing a petition for full custody of Isla. She claimed Caleb was emotionally unfit, citing vague periods of instability, conveniently omitting that she was the one who'd left him under a bridge. She described me as an elderly guardian with a pattern of interference, suggesting I had undue influence over both Caleb and Isla's routine. There were no photographs of bruises, no doctor's notes, no real substance, just long, careful language designed to sound official. She wanted her daughter back. But that wasn't what caught my attention. It was the paragraph buried in the middle, a request for financial disclosures related to any ongoing family-owned enterprise. A line about Isla's rightful access to shared marital assets. That's what this was. She didn't want Isla. She wanted the shop. I sat down at the kitchen table and reread the letter twice. Caleb came in from the back, carrying a crate of jars, saw the expression on my face, and froze. I slid the letter toward him. He didn't speak while he read, just stared harder and harder until his hands started to shake. "She left us," he said finally. "She left her own daughter. She doesn't want Isla," I said. "She wants the business, maybe the house too if she thinks she can reach it." Caleb leaned forward, elbows on the table. "What do we do?" I reached for the drawer by the stove and pulled out a slim binder. Old deeds, licenses, bank statements, things I hadn't looked at in years but never threw away. "We start by reminding her whose name is still on what." He nodded slowly. "I'll find a lawyer." "No," I said. "We already have one." I slid a card across the table. The name was familiar to him. Marcia Lynn. She'd gone to school with Caleb. Now she handled family law. The next morning, I made an appointment. Marcia's office asked us to bring every document we had. The binder was heavier than I remembered. Years of statements, notarized copies, handwritten receipts. I laid everything out on the dining room table, rows of paper stacked like floorboards. Caleb watched in silence as I moved through them, slow and methodical. The house was in my name alone. Richard and I had bought it in 1988, long before Adrienne came along. The deed had never been touched. The retirement account was thinner now. I saw the withdrawals Adrienne had convinced Caleb to authorize when they were still planning to move. Temporary cash flow, she'd told him. Just to get us started in London. It was almost gone by the time he realized she had no intention of starting anything with him. And then the shop. I found the license tucked behind an old holiday card from a supplier. I unfolded the thin, creased paper. Sole proprietor, Evelina Voss. My signature. No amendments, no co-owners, no successors listed. She'd missed it. The next day, I took everything to Marcia's office. Her assistant scanned each page carefully while Marcia sat with me in a quiet room, reviewing copies on a tablet. "She's overreaching," she said finally. "She doesn't have a case for custody unless she can prove Caleb is unfit. And from what I see here, she has no legal claim to the business or the house." I nodded. "But she'll come loud. She'll make a mess." Marcia looked up. "Then we'll stay quiet. And we'll be ready." She helped us draft a formal response. Clean, firm, without emotion. We didn't counterattack. We documented. Caleb signed calmly. Isla sat in the corner drawing hearts on a notepad, unaware of the war unfolding around her name. When we got home, I put the original license back in its folder and slipped it into the safe under the stairs. That night, I lit the stove and started boiling sugar for a new batch. Caleb was boxing up peanut clusters in the back. We worked in rhythm, no music, no talking, just the old sounds of a shop breathing again. Then the phone rang. It was Marcia. The court date had been set. The courtroom felt colder than it needed to be. Caleb sat beside me in a pressed shirt and borrowed tie, one hand gripping his knee so tightly his knuckles were white. Across the aisle, Adrian arrived 10 minutes late, wearing soft gray and a silk scarf looped just so. Her expression was carefully arranged, worried but composed. Her lawyer did most of the talking. He spoke about Caleb's financial instability, his temporary housing situation, and then turning to me, referred to a grandmother whose emotional involvement clouds her ability to provide a stable environment. I didn't flinch. I'd been called worse by better people. Adrian dabbed at her eyes when prompted. Claimed she had sought a peaceful life abroad only to be forced into action out of concern for her daughter's well-being. When asked why she had not reached out to Isla for over 4 months, she mentioned delicate matters of timing and healing. Marcia rose without raising her voice. She submitted a packet of documents to the judge bank statement's property records notarized letters. Then she turned to the final page. "This is a signed waiver," she said, in which Ms. Adrienne Voss renounced all custodial claims during the financial restructuring of the candy shop. Witnessed. Dated. On file. Adrian's lawyer objected, citing stress and emotional duress. But the paper spoke plainly. So did the next document, a forensic analysis showing Caleb's name was forged on 2 separate business transfers. During the period Adrian emptied the accounts. The judge read each page in silence. When he looked up, his expression didn't waver. "I see no credible reason to alter the current custody arrangement," he said. "In fact, this court recommends further review of Ms. Voss's financial conduct." Adrienne's scarf shifted as she inhaled sharply, her poise cracking in the edges of her mouth. Caleb didn't move. He sat still, eyes locked forward, as if watching something crumble that only he could see. Outside, the afternoon was bright and too warm for October. Adrienne didn't look at us as she left the building. She didn't need to. She knew we had kept what she wanted, and she had left her own name on the damage. We stepped out into the courthouse courtyard, the air thick with exhaust and leftover arguments. Caleb walked a few paces ahead, Isla's small drawing tucked in his pocket like a charm. I was folding the paperwork back into my bag when I heard heels click sharply behind me. Evelina Adrian called her voice crisp, practiced. I turned. She stood a few feet away, sunlight glinting off the edge of her sunglasses. "We don't have to end this badly." I waited. "I just want what's fair," she continued. "I built that business with him. I gave him the idea to expand, to modernize. I should have something. A percentage, maybe." Her tone was honey poured over rust. I looked at her carefully, at the woman who once sat at my kitchen table pretending to like my candy, who called me Mom, with a smile she'd learned from a mirror. "You already took everything you never earned," I said. My voice came out steady even. "The rest you only borrowed until the truth caught up." Something flickered in her eyes, pride maybe, or just surprise that I'd said it without anger. For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but instead, she drew in a slow breath and said, "You're colder than I thought." I closed my bag and stepped around her. "No," I said. "Just finished." Caleb was waiting by the car, leaning against the door, watching, but not speaking. When I reached him, he opened the passenger side for me. Adrienne lingered behind us for a few seconds more, then turned away, her heels clicking in rhythm down the concrete path. We didn't speak on the drive home. The noise of the road filled the spaces words would have bruised. Isla's drawing had fallen onto the seat between us, a picture of the shop, bright windows, a smiling sun. Caleb reached for it, smoothed the edges, and tucked it back into the glove box. By the time we pulled into the driveway, the sun had dipped low enough to paint the shop sign gold. Inside, the air was warm again, carrying the smell of sugar melting on the stove. The taffy had cooled just enough to twist. I worked it into soft ropes, cut and wrapped each piece, and dropped them into paper bags lined with wax. The citrus batch always sold fastest, just enough zest to brighten the tongue without biting it. Isla stood on the step stool near the back wall, humming quietly as she arranged jars in color order. She had her own system red for anything that sparkled blue, for anything chewy yellow, for the ones that crunch like leaves. She took it seriously. I tied a ribbon around a finished bag and handed it to a woman who smiled and said she used to come here with her grandmother. Her eyes lingered for a moment too long on the counter, like it stirred something she hadn't thought about in years. Caleb was out front with a bucket and rag, wiping fingerprints from the glass. He worked slower now, not out of fatigue, but something closer to contentment. He'd taken on early shifts at the produce market a few blocks down. Nothing fancy, but it gave him structure, gave him dignity. Most days we moved around each other like pieces in a rhythm. We didn't talk about Court or Adrian or the years we lost. Some stories are too dense to retell without getting stuck inside them again. Instead, we filled the shelves. We wrote labels. We taught Isla how to measure with her eyes, how to test caramel without burning it, how to know when something smells right. The shop smelled of orange peels and brown sugar. The floors creaked in the same places the bell above the door still rang crooked, but people came. Some out of nostalgia, some out of habit, a few just curious. I counted the register at closing and folded each paper bag just so. Caleb dimmed the lights. Isla ran her finger along the shelf to make sure it was even. I slipped the day's earnings into a tin beneath the counter and tucked a fresh note into the ledger. Then I flipped the sign to closed and turned toward the back, already thinking about tomorrow's batch.